All right, everybody. David Fogel, CEO of the Symphonina Foundation. I'm here with David Bernard, the conductor, maestro of the Park Avenue Chamber Symphony, which I understand, and I didn't understand until just today, you founded in
Yes.
1999, if I understand. So please tell me how you did that and what led up to doing it.
Well, it's as artists, we are always striving to create. And I had a vision for an orchestra that would be able to, through creating uh, uh, performances of great music at a high level, would also be able to reach more and more people, and do it in a way that would be innovative. And that innovation uh, took hold in many ways. It's our 25th anniversary this year, so
Yeah.
clearly we went through phases there. But that was the impetus for founding the Park Avenue Chamber Symphony.
So you're right on Manhattan on Park Avenue then.
Yes, well, we're not really on Park Avenue now, but we kept the name.
Okay.
So,
Fair enough.
so
Fair,
the name
fair.
the name has lived on,
Some names are good, and that is a good one.
yeah,
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
right,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
absolutely.
Well,
And
so
and so
go
yeah,
ahead.
go ahead.
No, no.
Sorry.
I
Go
was
ahead.
just going to say for people who aren't familiar with the difference between a chamber symphony and let's say a regular symphony, whatever that is, why don't we talk about that a little bit? Let's.
Sure, absolutely. And the name actually is a little controversial because when people hear chamber symphony, they think it's going to be a small orchestra. And uh what went into the name was a little bit more than that. Now, personally, when I hear chamber orchestra, I think of a small group. But what we were looking for in how we make music, there's a certain clarity, transparency, and intimacy in chamber music that we wanted to infuse into symphonic music. And so we call ourselves a chamber symphony, to depict that, right? So
Mhm.
when you listen to our recordings, what we hope you hear is the music to be presented in a way that has both intimacy, transparency, and clarity that may not be in a full philharmonic or full symphonic recording.
I see. So I would say when I listen to your recordings, I feel like they are well, certainly at the same quality as any other full symphony that I would listen to, and if not with greater clarity, greater power sometimes. I want to say lesser power is somehow worse. I mean, it depends on the aesthetic that someone's going for, but certainly a very powerful effect from the symphony that you conduct with the work that I've heard.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think that one of the things that's important, especially in music written, actually it's music, all classical music, no matter when it was written, is the contrapuntal element. And I'm sure that you focus on this when you were focusing on the Symphonina Foundation and listening to, and certainly when I was listening to the candidate pieces, you certainly will hear the degree to which composers focus on the horizontal dimension, the contrapuntal dimension in their music. And it doesn't have to be older music or strictly tonal music. It could be in any kind of music. Now, it's that type of clarity, right? That a this approach, it's not necessarily a smaller orchestra, but it's an approach that is focused very much on the clarity of line, the clarity of texture. And
Mhm.
that's where we got this from.
Very good. So
Yeah.
before you started the chamber symphony in 99, just before Y2K. What were you doing, and how did you get into music? How did you start to want to become a conductor?
Well, if we go the origin story, well, the
Yes, why
origin
not?
story,
Why
it
not?
be it you know it actually it's very interesting because I grew up in a family of musicians. My mother went to Juilliard as a pianist and a vocalist.
Hmm.
My father loved music. Wasn't a professional musician, but loved it and had a huge record collection, which I certainly took advantage of from a very, very young age.
Hmm.
I think one of the I was just talking about this the other day with people that one of the important elements there are a few important elements that trigger you to become a musician. Certainly your teachers, right? So you're inspired by certain teachers, and I certainly had several teachers who were very inspiring. Then, when I was a teenager, I listened to an album. I don't know if you remember this, but it was Switched on Bach.
Oh
Do you
yes,
remember? Do
I
you
do.
remember Switched on
Absolutely,
Bach?
I do.
Yeah,
Yeah, my
yeah.
dad had that for sure.
And the thing about Switched on Bach, first of all, Bach is universal. Bach is something that, you could play it on a harmonica, a synthesizer, a guitar, and it conveys the same sophistication on any instrument. But on that synthesizer, Wendy Carlos went through. I don't know if you've read about this, but Wendy Carlos, when she created this switched on Bach, the Moog synthesizer was a monophonic instrument,
Mm-hmm.
and you had to not just create every sound, but every decay of every sound and every nuance had to be purposely created as you were pulling this together. But it's monophonic. You had to actually play one line at a time and sync them together.
Oh wow. Okay.
It was a incredible feat. Now, I didn't really know much about that when I listened to it the first time. What I did know was that this was brilliant, and it 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 triggered such a elation in
Yeah.
me when I listened to it that that was really conveyed to me what music could do, and that really got me started. It's kind of funny because
What
as a
year was
simple.
what year was that, David?
Oh my goodness, it must have been the late 70s or something like that. It
Yeah, and I'm
was, yeah.
wondering how they were able to do that synchronization. Because see, like
I,
when we're doing the International Symphonina Orchestra recordings, we're having people play
Mhm.
all over, and I have to
Right.
sync them. I know what I'm doing in Logic Pro, and that's
Yeah.
enough. That's like I get out. Like it's a chore and it's worth it, but it's still a chore. I can hardly imagine with the tools that one would have in 1980, 19 late
Yeah.
70s.
Actually,
How
what
do you do
I
it?
think it
I
was
mean,
even
but
earlier. I think it came out earlier, but I
might
mean,
have been,
the
yeah.
I think it's also thinking of it this way, and when you put it that way, it every performance of any work, if you're pulling it together, and especially what you do with Symphonina Foundation, when I'm pulling together a recording of Mahler 5,
Mhm.
right? All of these things take an insane amount of dedication and innovation from a small number of people. That's a universal thing in the arts and
Yeah.
in creating these wonderful concerts, recordings. These are all projects that really take, they'll take everything that you can give and you make it happen. And so when I think of the dedication that Wendy Carlos put into Switched on Bach, that also inspires me, right? For
Yeah.
for all of these reasons.
Yeah, yeah. You came up with an innovative idea of seating the audience in the orchestra. Tell us about that.
Oh yes, well, inside out concerts, right? Now this is, I think what happened was, we're with the Park Avenue Chamber Symphony, we're very successful. The orchestra was, we would do things, we would put on exciting concerts. some of them benefit concerts, raise a lot of money for important causes, really great things. But after a certain point, I was thinking to myself, is that all there is? Is there something that we could do to build audiences in classical music? And when I talk about building audiences, certainly it doesn't take a lot to program, say, uh, uh, Harry Potter or Star Wars to an orchestra in a concert hall, and you get tons of people coming, you
Right.
sell out. But the next night you're performing Beethoven, Mozart, or Schubert, and you would have an empty hall. There must be a way to present classical music in such a way where you can actually authentically build audiences. Because as musicians, right, we are transfixed when we're inside an orchestra. It's an incredible experience for the performers,
Right.
right?
Absolutely.
And you can't match that, right? You're sitting in an orchestra as a violinist, clarinetist, cellist, performing Mahler, Bruckner, Beethoven, whatever it is you're playing, and there's this electricity between you and the other musicians, and you can see the conductor, and it's just this amazing experience for you. But then when you think about the audience who's sitting 50 meters away in a seat out there,
Yep.
aside from hearing the great music, what else is there for the audience? Right. And I thought to myself, well, uh, wouldn't it be great if we just brought the audience inside? Right?
Mhm.
Because so that they can share in that electricity. And that's where this came from, right? And the first uh, Inside Out concert was I chose this purposely, Beethoven's Fifth
Okay.
Symphony,
All
ma
right.
mainly because everybody knows it,
Hmm.
right? Or everybody knows at least the opening or the first movement.
Or they've heard the disco
And
version. I mean, they've heard it for
I
sure,
I
right?
remember that.
Yeah,
I remember
exactly.
that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But again, you look even if your entry point into that was Walter Murphy, right? Uh, you still know it to a certain degree. And I'll
Right.
tell you a funny story about the Beatles next, by the way.
Yeah.
Um, but we had people in that concert. We had a wide range of people. We had people who've never been to a classical concert ever, and we had people who've seen and heard Beethoven's Fifth a million times. And it was uh, universally a success. It was a universal success. Everybody thought it was wonderful. The people who've never been to a concert before, oh my goodness, you've never been to a concert before, and then all of this is going on around you. You're able to see
Yeah.
you're sitting next to the violins. You're able to see the music being made. And one of the directives I say to people is, okay, you not only can you, but you should look around, look behind you. The most interesting thing in the room is not necessarily in front of you,
Right.
you're on an airplane.
Like on airplane. Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
and
Yeah.
and but then also the experienced concert goers were saying, "Wow, I've never heard Beethoven's Fifth this way, where I could hear all of the inner parts intermingling." There's a lot. Speaking of contrapuntal,
Yeah.
Beethoven, by the way, when he was a teenager, was known for playing the well-tempered clavier, Bach's well-tempered clavier from memory, and that was one of his big
Mm.
uh, feathers in his cap. Um, and so there's a lot of contrapuntal textures in his music and in Beethoven's Fifth, and it's you only when you're inside the orchestra do you get the full experience. And so it was great. It was a wonderful experience for people, and it's been a big success for the orchestra. And I have done this with other orchestras. This is something I do. I'm able to come to other orchestras,
Hmm.
and I set the whole thing up. I work with them on marketing. I work with them on how to structure an inside out performance, and talk to them about their goals for audience development, for fundraising, all of these things. And I've done this with several orchestras, and we now have a patent, by the way, on this,
Cool. Right.
which was awarded last year.
That's awesome. When you have people sitting in the orchestra, how many get to sit in the orchestra? Can't have everybody sit in the orchestra, I guess. But
Oh, yes, you can.
oh yes, you
You
can.
can have
Okay. All right.
everybody sit in the orchestra. There's a way, obviously, if you have a very small orchestra, it becomes more difficult to
Hmm.
fit everybody in. And like if you want to fit 200 people inside a string quartet, that doesn't work, right?
Right.
But if
They
you
may as
have an
well be in the
orchestra,
audience at that point, right?
that's right. Well,
Yeah.
if you have an orchestra of 60 to 80,
Hmm.
80 to 90 musicians, we've had I just did an Inside Out on Long Island with an orchestra of 70 with an audience of 400.
Wow.
And
Okay.
that was an incredible event. That
Yeah.
was fantastic.
So
Yes.
are all of your events inside out then, or do you have traditional seating as well?
No, they're not all inside out. And you know,
Okay.
I'm music director of two orchestras, the Park Avenue Chamber Symphony and the Massapequa Philharmonic.
Hmm.
The Many of the Park Avenue Chamber Symphony concerts are inside out.
Hmm.
Um, and I bring some inside out concerts to the Massapequa Philharmonic as well. Um, but no, we traditional concerts are wonderful as well.
Okay. All right. Now this year you have released two albums, if I recall correctly, right? One is a combination of Beethoven's Third and Mahler's Fifth, and the other
Yes,
is the last three symphonies from Tchaikovsky, four, five, and six. Correct?
yes,
Okay. So
absolutely.
tell me a little bit about the musical selection choices for these two albums and how you came to put them together.
So, I'll start with the Beethoven's Eroica and Mahler's Fifth. The interesting thing about these pieces, and we all have some knowledge about Beethoven's Eroica, right? We all have heard the story about how Beethoven was a big fan of Napoleon as a leader and Napoleon's philosophy. But when Napoleon crowned himself Emperor of Europe, he shall we say, didn't like that so much, and so he ended up uh, ended up crossing off his name and making the Napoleon Symphony into the Eroica Symphony.
Mm.
So uh, there's a there I think is a more accurate version of this story, and I'm going to go into that in a second. But both of these pieces, Beethoven's Eroica and Mahler's Fifth, represent incredible shifts in these composers' style and creativity from a significant event in their lives. In
Mm.
Beethoven's life, what happened was we know Beethoven was going deaf, and he got to the point in his life where he almost committed suicide and was really could not deal with the fact that he was losing his hearing, and had he went away to sort of ponder his life and where he was going. He ultimately decided that he would not end his life, and he would write more boldly and more shockingly, and he came out of that experience with an incredible intensity, right?
Mm.
That started what we've come to what has come to be known as his heroic period.
Mm.
And the first piece he wrote after this was the Eroica Symphony, right?
Okay.
Now, interesting thing about it, based on the story that I just gave you about Napoleon, you would think that if that were true, after he shifted the Eroica Symphony, the Napoleon Symphony, the Eroica Symphony, he would no longer talk to Napoleon. Napoleon was dead to him. Actually, that's not true. He was friends with Napoleon and his family for many years after that.
Mm.
And the truth of the matter is that rather than out of anger from Napoleon's actions, the shift from Napoleon to another, he shifted to another prince as the dedicatee of that piece, might have been due to the fact that he would actually get a commission. So it might have been a monetary decision. But the true thing here is that the Eroica was designed to shock the Viennese. That is what
Mm,
the main point of the Eroica is. It's not really about depicting Napoleon's life. It's
I
really
see.
about shock.
Okay.
And there's an incredible connection between that piece and Mozart's 39th Symphony. You can even actually hear connections between them, but it's designed knowing that Mozart's 39th Symphony was what the Viennese were listening to at that time.
Mm,
This was perfectly designed, kind of like
I see.
a jump scare, kind of
Yeah.
like a horror movie, that kind of
Yeah.
thing. Now, all right, so let me get to Mahler because
Yeah.
I know you went, yeah. So Mahler went through a near-death experience. He was not a healthy man. I don't think he was really healthy at any time in his life. He was always very sickly to a certain degree, but
Mm,
he almost died. And then while in recovery, he started writing the Fifth Symphony, and he met Alma, who would become his wife. And so his life shifted dramatically during the time of writing the Fifth Symphony. Now, during this time, he uh, he he reevaluated his creative voice from these very big symphonies with these programs and with texts that talk about philosophy and life and all of this down. He started to become a lot more transparent and focusing more on contrapuntal texture. So if
mhm,
you listen to the Fifth Symphony, it is a big orchestra, it's a big
mhm.
sound, all of that, but there is a transparency to it. It's a very different creative voice than his earlier symphonies. And so this heroic Beethoven Eroica and Mahler's Fifth pairing uh, demonstrates the same concept, which is how a significant life event can be the catalyst for
Yeah.
creative creative change.
Yeah. It often
And
is, right?
yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. So
Yeah.
I'm sorry, that's
No,
my big long.
that's all very good. Then on the other side, you have Tchaikovsky's fourth, fifth, and sixth. So
Yes.
how did you make those selections?
Well, the fourth, fifth, and sixth symphonies of Tchaikovsky are themselves uh monumental and significant and brilliant and fantastic works. But they also tell an interesting story about Tchaikovsky's life. Um, Tchaikovsky was a tortured soul for most of his life, and tortured mainly because he felt that he had to conform with with what society wanted from him. Artistically, there's an interesting story about Tchaikovsky writing Romeo and Juliet. I'm sure you know Tchaikovsky's Romeo and Juliet fantasy overture.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, it took him 10 years to write that
I
because
know.
he was basically writing at the behest of Balakirev, who was the leader of the Mighty Five group of composers in Russia.
Hmm.
And Balakirev was very heavy-handed with Tchaikovsky, basically telling him exactly what to write, exactly what progressions and phrasing and all of the elements. When Tchaikovsky would send him a version, he would reject it and berate him. Over three versions in 10 years, he finally got it done. But at the end of that, he met uh, von Meck, who is a Russian philanthropist who basically took Tchaikovsky under her wing, even though they never met, and freed him of this. She financed him. He was able to then uh, curtail his teaching and become a full-time composer. And it was at that point, which was just at the end of this writing of Tchaikovsky's Romeo and Juliet,
Mhm.
that 10-year period that he probably had PTSD from.
Yeah.
Um, he he then started to write his Fourth Symphony, and his Fourth Symphony was on a whole other level than the previous
So the
three.
first time he feels free, essentially, to write what he
Yes,
wants to write.
exactly.
Yeah.
But not totally free, right? I mean, he was still, there were still these things that pulled him back. It took him time. His fourth, his fifth symphonies,
Hmm.
he was fully free by the time he wrote his sixth, the Pathétique.
Okay.
Now, this is an interesting situation here because many people believe, mainly because he died 9 days after he 9 days after
I am learning so
the
much here today,
the
David. This is good. Keep
the
going. Like musical
he
history
died
lesson
nine
for the
days
month. We're going. It's good.
he died 9 days after the premiere of his sixth symphony, the
Wow.
Pathétique,
Hmm.
and he died after drinking unboiled water, and that is many people believe that that was his way of committing suicide. And they believe that the Pathétique is itself a suicide note. Now, I don't believe this. And the reason why I don't believe it is if you listen to the Pathétique Symphony, it's it's this incredibly brilliant and significant work. A person
Hmm.
who has one foot out the door of this world would not invest in writing a piece like the Pathétique Symphony. That's the main thing. But if you go through each movement of the Pathétique Symphony, it is really about Tchaikovsky demonstrating his full creative voice after having been restricted for so long. If you listen to the first movement of the Pathétique, it really is very much the version of Romeo and Juliet that he would have written if he just wrote
Interesting.
what he wanted. It's in
Yeah.
the same key, it's in B minor. And even though Romeo and Juliet took him 10 years to write, it took him 3 days to write the first movement of Pathétique,
Wow.
right? It was
Crazy.
just
Okay.
waiting to just come out,
Yeah.
right? And then, interesting, second movement of Pathétique is we can call it a waltz. It sounds like a waltz, but normally you think of waltzes in 3/4 time.
Right.
1 2 3, 1 2 3. This is actually in five.
Oh,
It's in
really?
5/4.
Okay.
And but the interesting thing about it is that it really flows. It can flow.
Hmm.
You really see it as 2 + 1 + 2. 1 2 1 1 2. One
Oh,
two
okay.
one one two. 1 2 1 1. That's the way I and as a result of that, it really does float along better than a regular waltz. If you think of 1 2 3, 1 2 3, that's a little square, right? If you hear 1 2 1 1 2, 1 2 1 1 2, it kind of
Yeah.
just it kind of puffs on each side of the
Yeah.
measure, and
Yeah.
and so that is very innovative. And the way I like to see that is that this is his approach at showing you his innovative abilities to write waltzes. Now if Strauss
Hmm.
weren't crowned the waltz king, Tchaikovsky would have been, right?
Hmm.
Because if you listen to his ballet waltzes, he
Yeah. Yeah.
has
Yeah.
written
Yeah.
so many waltzes, you know. So, but here he's really outdone himself. Now, the third movement is his symphonic finales. Actually hear quotes from various finales from his symphonies, from his fourth and fifth symphonies. But
Okay.
again, put together in a way that is brilliant, innovative, and new, right? So anyway, if you listen to this album of Tchaikovsky's fourth, fifth, and sixth symphonies, you get a an incredible you get an incredibly insightful view of Tchaikovsky's creative arc. And that's why I put that together.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it all makes sense as you describe it. And like I said, I mean, it's tremendous. Where do you learn all this history, David? Seriously.
Oh, well,
I mean, you live it. You live it. So you learn it over your lifetime, and you're dedicated to it.
well,
But I
you
mean,
learn it over your lifetime, but at the same time, some of it comes directly from the music, right? Because for example, this whole notion of Tchaikovsky writing his suicide note in the Sixth Symphony,
mhm.
and when you study this music and you're fully committed to it, you it doesn't quite fit that narrative. And
Yeah.
so you
Okay.
kind of peel the onion a little bit and you're like, okay, what is this work about? And then you do research on it and you read a little bit more, you read some of his letters, you do all that. And what you want to do is come out with a conception that is consistent with the notes you're hearing, right? So history is not just facts. As a matter of fact, the music itself can be the most accurate source for history,
Well,
right?
that's a great line. We'll have to remember that one. That's good. Yeah.
And so you hear all of these things, and um you hear the pieces themselves reveal what the truth is, right? You'll hear connections
Yes,
if
but
you're
you
if
get to
you're open to
you have a lot of freedom as a conductor to conduct things and have them turn out different ways. So it's not entirely up to you. I mean, the music you say tells you the story, but it's up to you to as the conductor to interpret it the way you see fit.
well, I think it's true. I mean, I could say it's as a musician, right? And you speak to any musician who's performing like in a recital in chamber music, a solo recital, things like that. It's a daunting responsibility to be a musician, right? Because when you look at the score doesn't tell you everything about how to perform it, right? The
Right.
score, I like to say that there's the score and there's the work,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
And the score can only tell you so much about the work, but it is your only portal into the work, right? And that's what musicianship is. Musicianship is being able to go from the score and realize the work.
Yeah,
That's
it's sort of like a genetic blueprint, and then you have an organism. Well, there's an environment, right? It depends on what
that's right.
environment and all that. So you still have
That's
that blueprint, that plan, but
that's right.
it
And
can lead to
and
different
there's a
outcomes.
meaning. There's a meaning, right? There's a meaning. Now, the meaning of music is not always clear, right? It's not as
Yeah.
though there is a there's not an official meaning. Even if the composer says, this is what this piece means, right?
Sure, right. They write a
That
paragraph up front for you.
right, they might
Right.
say that. They might try. And the funny thing about it, when composers who would write program music, right, where they would actually write, they might be inclined to write a couple of paragraphs about what they think the music is about. And most composers who try to do that end up tearing that up because they want the music to speak for itself.
Hmm.
And often what happens is, there's this concept in poetry called the intentional fallacy, which is Wimsatt and Beardsley. Uh, a poet can write a poem, and the poem can be recited. Now, if you're a listener, if you're in the audience and hearing that poem, or if you're reading that poem, and the meaning of that poem that you have inferred from the poem, if a poet intended the meaning to be something else, who's right and who's wrong, right?
Yep.
And it's not and often in music, people would often say, well, the composer's always right. But in art, what you perceive from the art is very, very important, right?
Yeah,
What
yeah.
the listener or the audience member or the reader, right? Um,
Yeah, it's like in any
gets a
communication, David, right? I mean, there's an intention with the communication, but the receiver might have a different interpretation of that intent, which might be good
yeah,
or not,
exactly.
but it might be good in their situation. So
Exactly.
you
But
can't guarantee what the receiver is going to feel.
that's true. You can't guarantee that, but you're putting it out there. You're putting it out there. The process of appreciating or consuming the art is it's part of the overall process of creating it too. And so, in
Yeah, yeah.
some ways, the composer doesn't necessarily maintain ownership of the significance of their work. It's something that is once you put it out there, it's out there,
It
right?
lives and it does its own thing. So I don't want to date our interview here, but you do have both of these albums submitted for Grammy consideration. What are the categories?
Well, they're both being considered for best orchestral performance.
Best orchestral performance, great. And then
Yes.
what do you have coming up next? What's
Oh,
next?
well, I love that question. What's next? We always want to know what's next. We always
I
want to
do.
create something new. Well, speaking of Mahler, I have a festival that I've created between both of my orchestras, the Park Avenue Chamber Symphony and the Massapequa Philharmonic, called Beginnings and Endings.
Mhm.
And what it does is it pairs Mahler's first symphony, the Titan, with Mahler's ninth symphony, his last complete symphony.
Okay.
And um, the the challenge with Mahler is that while there are many people who live and breathe Mahler and love every Mahler symphony and just are can't get enough, um, there are also people who Mahler can be difficult. It can have a difficult on ramp to it, and each Mahler symphony takes a commitment, right? I mean, they're
True.
usually hour-long symphonies,
Or
and
more.
they're infused with I mean, the emotion and so many. It's an emotional roller coaster, and you're going from highs to lows. I like to say when Mahler writes symphonies, he puts you inside his head,
Hmm.
and that head can be a scary place.
Okay.
So, so, but through this beginnings and endings festival,
Mhm,
what we're able to do is show a with with clarity, right?
mhm.
The creative arc of Mahler from the beginning through
Yeah,
his
yeah, yeah.
entire life,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah.
And one of the reasons we can do that is because the first and the ninth symphonies are very much related, right? Um, Especially in the first movements, if you compare both first movements, the first movement of Mahler's first is very much about an innocent view of his youth.
Mm,
And the first movement of Mahler's ninth is a view of his youth, but with a lot more experience and maturity,
mm,
right? But you're able to hear the connections. The Mahler's ninth does quote the first symphony and does the voice
mhm.
of that movement of Mahler's ninth, the first movement, is clearly more knowing and mature, but going after something similar. And so if you can hear
Interesting.
them together,
Now,
it's
when are you performing these coming up soon, or is this planned for 2025? What's
no,
your
no.
timeline?
The first symphony in Massapequa will be on October 27th,
Coming right up. Okay, so
coming right up.
if people want to go, how do they get in touch with you?
Yeah, well, there's you can the Massapequa Philharmonic uh website is massphil.com. You can get tickets there. I also have a specific URL for the Beginnings and Endings Festival, which I'll send you. You can have that, maybe
We'll
include
put that
that
in the
with.
description. That's great.
Yeah,
And
right.
if people want to
Mhm.
get in touch with you directly, what's the best way to do that?
Well, my website is davidbernard.com,
Hmm.
and my email address is davidbernard@davidbernard.com.
Couldn't be easier, right? Exactly.
That's right.
All right,
That's right.
David. We've covered a lot today, and I have learned a lot today, and it's been great. And I look forward to our next installment because I'm sure this won't be our last. So
Oh, it was a pleasure. It's always a pleasure to chat with you, and I look forward to the next time.
thank you so much.
Thank you.